So good morning, everyone, to this breakout session on data collection pipelines and microscope operation. So we have three very nice panelists that agreed on giving a very short introduction to their facilities. And these panelists are Yuri, James, and Wim. Yuri is from the EBIC at the Diamond. He has a background in biology and biophysical chemistry. And the EBIC is running as a national facility with international users from the UK and EU and also industry. They have a huge number of users, which is around, I think, 1,000, he wrote me. And they run an enormous amount of sessions per year, which is around 400 to 600. They have also a lot of instrumentation. I think in some they have like more than 10 large electron microscopes, which ranges from I think 4 or 5 Titan cryoses over Arcticas, FIP, SEM equipment, and also screening machines and smaller microscopes like Arcticas and lasers. James, who is our second panelist, he's from the Scottish, I think it's a Scottish Center for Molecular Imaging, if I'm correct. He has a background in biochemistry and structural biology. So he also comes from the application side. The facility is located in Glasgow, if I'm not mistaken, and is also run as a national facility and was founded by a consortium of different universities, which is Dundee, Glasgow, Edinburgh, and St. Andrews. They have a smaller user base than the EBIC. So they have about 34 users, of which about 20 are always active. And they host 3 machines, one for negative stain, one for side entry cryo screening, and the Cryo-EM 300 for high-end data collection. So it will be interesting to hear from him how they're running this with the JO machines. And the third panelist we have is Wim from the EMBL in Heidelberg. His background is more on the engineering side. So he was working for the Royal Dutch Navy for a long time and also at FEI for 11 years. So I think he might be a person giving very valuable input on the instrumentation part of the discussion today. The EMBL Imaging Center, hopefully, he said it will open mid-2021, should be an imaging center which is open for all users. At the moment, they're running something he called a pilot program where they have a small number of internal users, about 35, but they're also running a large number of external sessions via iNext, Instruct, and EMBL Direct Access. They're hosting a Morgani, Techni, Arctica, and 2 cryoses for all kinds of screening, initial data collection, and serious data collection tasks. And now I would ask Yuri to maybe start to give a brief sum up on how they run the facility, and then James, and then Wim. And then I think we will start diving into a rather open discussion. I have prepared a few topics, but we will just see how this goes and how it flows. So please, Yuri, go ahead.
Thank you very much for your introduction. I would like to show you a couple of slides. Basically, first I would like to make some corrections. We operate as data collection facility. We only allow screening and sample preparation for collaborations and in-house use. So we have 4 Titan cryos and Thales Arctica on user program for transmission electron microscopy and SICE and Aquilus for feed milling. Also, we're commissioning like a cryoclam, which would allow us to do a correlation microscopy on site. So we also have a twin EBIC for industry, which allows access for industrial users, and they have separate Titan cryos and glaciers microscope. We're also managing new glaciers instrument for research complex, which also has its user base, and they're going to use, well, we'll see how it will unravel, but the idea is that they will use our system to work on this instrument as well. So instruments are primarily used for data collection, and this is how EBIC was designed. We don't really have possibility to screen a lot of samples, which might be a problem for some users. So most of sessions are block allocation groups, and they're peer-reviewed, and once time is allocated, then micromanagement of the time inside the allocation is up to back management. We also expect them to pre-screen grids, so they come with things which are ready for data collection. Super user in EPU user training is constantly running program. We started it about a year and a half ago, and COVID-19 actually helped to accelerate this. So now we allow majority of users who are EPU users that they can operate within EPU, which is 90% of operation, using cloud access to the instrument, and we just help them to prepare instrument, but they set up the session. So automated data analysis pipeline is based on Reliant, and it includes image preprocessing and 2D classification, 3D model generation, and 3D classification. There's not a lot of control on this pipeline, which we give to user, just initial setup, which asks about electron dose and size of the particles. Users can download all the data we generated during the session, and we're working to further improve this. So I have some graphical summary how the whole process look like. So we, oh, excuse me. So because we located at Diamond, we're making, making use of some Diamond tools which are already there. So for user management, we rely on the user administration system, which helps to set up a session, check if users can come on site, if samples are safe to bring on site. Also, it triggers allocation of user space, and it triggers allocation of ISWB and SyncWeb entry, which we start increasingly use for sample management, and also we plan to extend it so the user can more easily monitor on-the-fly pipeline. Then after sample arrived and then the microscope, user can access instrument via remote data collection set up via NX Cloud. And then they already, after data collection started, they guarantee that they get raw data, but we can also do export for them. We can do on-the-fly processing of this data, and they can monitor it. Also, we encourage them that this on-the-fly processing is used to assess quality of the data they collect, and sometimes they need to adjust the settings to get most out of session. We also plan that currently we start on the fly processing ourselves, and we help with data management, but we hope that in near future users can do it themselves via a SyncWeb interface. We also have a hot helpline, which is EHC experimental whole coordinators. In case something goes wrong or data collection stops, they can call 24/7 to one of the EBIC staff, and we can help users to get back on track with data collection. And yeah, so basically that's all what I wanted to show about EBIC, and just would like to encourage further discussion on this topic. So what is your experience, what you think is best way forward along these lines?
Thanks, Yuri, for this very nice and very brief introduction to how your facility is running. Maybe James wants to continue on how they run things in Glasgow.
In Glasgow, our facility is kind of almost split in two. We run one JL Cryo-EM 300, so a fully automated high resolution machine. And in this, we run it similar to the way that EBIC would run its rapid access. So you apply for time, you have to meet some minimum threshold of the sample being good enough, class averages from a home machine being good enough, and then you get time on the machine. Then the other half of the facility is running a home machine, a machine capable of getting you to that point. So that's our JL F2 Cryo, a 200 kV side entry machine, and JL 1200 negative stain. So our local users in Glasgow can book the 2 side entry machines, but they can't just simply walk up and book the Cryo-EM. They have to prove to a group leader basically that they have sufficient, their sample is going to work for that. The SCMI is also, it's not just users from Glasgow, it is it's a consortium of 4 universities, so it just happens to be hosted in Glasgow. So that's also why it's kind of split in 2. We give one service to our internal users, and that is replicated across Edinburgh, Edinburgh, Dundee, and St Andrews, where they also have a side entry machine for doing their screening. They come to Glasgow to operate our 300 kV machine. In terms of the data collection, we have access to Serial-EM and JDAS, which is JL's proprietary data collection software. JL only have single particle collection software. They don't have tomography software. So therefore, Serial-EM is the only option for doing that, which is actually quite nice for us, because it means that they kind of adopt Serial-EM as their tomography platform, which means their software people install it, make sure it works. If it doesn't work, I get support for that in the same way as I would if it was their software. I can phone them up and say, yeah, this isn't working, or the new features don't work exactly as they're supposed to, or whatever. So yeah, that's actually a relatively nice way of working. It takes a little bit of pressure off what I need to do with it. And in terms of the remote access stuff that you just touched on at the end, we're really not properly set up for this at the moment. This has kind of been in for 2 reasons. One, our user training program is a little bit behind, so we don't have that many users who could operate it, who are trained to operate it remotely or not. So that therefore there's not that much pressure, but also we're still working on managing to get different users into the machine, especially different users from outside the University of Glasgow. It's one thing for the university to permit people that it has staff access for and registered for to get to our machine, but another thing to get completely external users into our network and our side of things. So that, I think I don't know if that's a common problem about sharing machines outside universities, but people, at least our university, our IT, are pretty, they make it relatively difficult to get a lot of people access to right into our machine. So that's a kind of ongoing discussion with them.
It was also a very nice brief summary from a very different perspective. So maybe Wim wants to close the introductory part, and then I think we will start heading into a more open discussion.
Yes, so we have been a facility kind of for the last 3 years. We basically were doing EM for all internal people. We also served the outstations of EMBL. And then a few years ago, we bought some extra microscopes and decided to do 30% external access for that through iNext. We also have an EMBL direct access scheme, and we're soon going to start with Instruct. The idea was that this was an exercise towards the imaging center. So we run 2 Krioses, an Arctica and a T12, and they are all running Serial-EM. That's the only software we use because it's only 2 people that have to run everything. And then with Serial-EM, we don't have that much of a training burden because we start training people on the T12, they move to the Arctica, it's still Serial-EM, so the loading is slightly different and the camera might be different. And the same if you go to a Krios. On top of that, there's a huge help manual that people go through, and everything is oriented on data collection only. So we don't really provide microscopy training. We just want to make data collection as easy as possible and as generic as possible. So, and then with Serial-EM, you basically can do correlations, you can do single particle, you can do tilted acquisition, you can do tomography, and that makes it very interesting for us. But again, it starts with, if we would have more people, maybe we would have different softwares to use. and also a bit more training on the microscopy side. But currently we're really just focusing on just data collection. External people, they come over with their grids, we load, we run the microscope, they just sit and watch and advise and help us. In current times, because I'm actually running a session right now, we basically load the samples, we map grids, then we open a team viewer on a support PC, and then people can look in a dummy instance of Cryo-EM that loads the navigator file. They can have a quick look, select the squares they want, then we map the squares, then they go through these square maps and select positions, and then we set everything up. So at least the decision making is done by those people. And again, we just do it on the support PC with Cryo-EM, nothing fancy with a team viewer. It's, as I've been saying for years, we totally run a poor man's solution, but it works, it serves us, and people are happy with it.
Thanks, Wim. So I think the first two introductions were already hitting one point that I think might be valuable to discuss, which is about screening possibilities. So, I mean, the first two facilities basically do not offer standard access to any screening machines, but I think we might have a few facilities around in this discussion room that actually offer screening access. And the question is, from my side, if maybe somebody could briefly report on how they actually organize screening, which means what kind of machine they use, if they are happy with that machine, and what the expected outcome would be if they offer screening time to a facility user.
Hey, I'm Adam from Brussels. We have the same machine as James in Glasgow. So we run Cryo-EM 300s. And we have two, and I think it's kind of a punk way to do stuff, because we have the worst microscope what can possibly anybody imagine to screen for cryo, but it works perfectly because they are super simple to operate. So we actually have two 1400 gels, and we have TEEDS cameras, F416s, which are very sensitive, and they are actually probably way more expensive than the microscope itself. And all the users can book for the time on the screening microscope, and they are trained in order to be independent or semi-independent, and everything is very, very close to each other. So actually we have some kind of you know, a hint or an overview what sample is screened to what extent, and which sample is close to actually be ready for the cryo-EM, because we are also actually training the users. So my part is partially running cryo-EM and partially train user to help them with their samples. So everything is kind of mixed together, and it's really right now with the K3 camera, we think that there is actually even way more necessary to screen more, because actually we are able to get up to 6,000 images or movies per day on the microscope. So in theory, the microscope is able to handle 3 or 4 samples per week. That means that you have to screen or have you know, couple samples ready every week. So that's why we think that this way is actually it's relatively, even though it's tighter than 300 and it's everything is very manual, still the users can actually, you know, we can host up to 5 users per day. We have negative stain cryo sessions on both microscopes, and it's like really cheap and efficient in comparison to some automated, for example, 200 kV solutions from FEI, which actually maybe work better, but they are also way more expensive. They have probably longer downtimes. They need more stuff, you know, to be maintained, maybe even operated.
Anyone else who is using a side entry machine for cryo screening?
I mean, we have a T12, but We also unfortunately have a Thales Arctica, which we use for screening. It has a Falcon 3. We only use it in linear mode. We don't even use parallel illumination there, but we just thought it would be a good idea because you can put 12 grids in, people just screen. And if you find something nice, you could run a small data acquisition overnight. And since we've been doing that, you see the usage of the T12 basically completely plummeting. So it's only the experienced people that then are willing to use it because the Arctica is so heavily booked. And that's, yeah, that's an unfortunate fact of, having a T12 and an Arctica. And this is a problem, but long term, I hope that the vendors come up with something easier and cheaper for this screening part. And then, but currently, I would say the T12 is mainly used if people want serious negative stain data sets. The negative stain they check quickly on the Morgani, but the Morgani is not really a scope to collect stuff. And since the T12 has serial EM, you can collect some negative stain data sets there. I think what's also important for this topic is whether or not you do it for external people. And there we had a tough discussion over the last years because iNext offered this enhanced support where then people just come with their sample and we would have to freeze and then screen. And I was totally against it, but was overruled here because I don't think you can deliver that as a facility because some people spend 3 years PhD on something like that. And sometimes you throw it on a grid and it just works the first time. And then it's very difficult to set the expectations. And we were told to spend 2 days on it. And I just can't get myself over it to say after 2 days, okay, we screened a couple of things, it didn't work, too bad, your 2 days are up. You can't do that as a facility. It has to go somewhere. And that makes it very difficult. And in that sense, a lot of experienced cryo people I talk to say, if you want to get into cryo, you need, the bare minimum you need is a plunger, can be a hand plunger, and some 120 kV, whatever side entry system in your hometown. And otherwise, forget it. You can't start in it, which is it's a very difficult topic.
Yeah, I totally agree that you should at least start with something where you can look at your own grids right after plunge freezing. So the question is here, how many people actually screen on a cryos? Because I know that many places don't have side entry or autoloader machines and they actually screen on Titan cryoses.
I have a small comment about that already, that we have a lot of tomography people with lamella and they have to go straight on a cryos.
Yeah, that's something I had on my list. So maybe we can just cover this now. So how many people actually do regularly screen tomography samples? And in that case, directly on the cryos? I guess it might not be.
We have some sort of experience with this because now, I mean, exactly as Wim pointed out, many people have problem of side entry holder machines and they're not quite compatible with Thermo Fisher solution with autoloaders. So basically the situation is you can screen grids in your batch, but the final screening will occur exactly on the instrument. So pretty much you can say you use post-screen on the cryos instrument. And that's the same applies for tomography people as well. So at the moment, it's actually much easier when we have remote access. So we let users load, because in the past, for operational purposes, we were restricting people to 4 grids. Now we say, okay, we load as many as we wish, especially if they come pre-clipped. Many people bought the clipping stations and they can clip in-house. And then they screen and choose the grid they like the best. And especially like with automated screening solutions, they immediately know which grid is most likely to yield good result. And with K3 camera, that becomes increasingly important because there is quite often people collect 3 sessions per 3-day session. So 3 data per 3-day session, because many samples were optimized to deliver a good result with about 3,000 to 5,000 images, which you can acquire in a day with K3.
So we actually do the same when we have tomography samples that we immediately allocate like 24 hours, which start in the morning. And then the user can just load a full cassette of FIB lamella, for example, and then go through all of them during the day. And then if there's anything good, they will just start setting up and basically save the best sample for the overnight shift to get as much data as possible. And so far this has worked quite well, especially that, you know, in case all lamella are broken or all samples are bad, usually we just, you know, took the next user who would jump in the next day and just gave this person additional 12 hours. So they were happy to make use of the additional time. But initially we thought about pre-screening some of the samples on our glaciers that we have, but we very quickly went away from this because of contamination of lamella samples and so on.
With lamellas, it's impossible.
Yeah, yeah.
That's why I raised my hand, because I just wanted to ask if anybody has been successful in, you know, transferring lamella into an autoloader, back out and back in, and still have lamella. We haven't gotten to that point yet, and that's what I meant with, if it's a tomography session, there could be grids going in, and with tomography sessions, there's just a bit more risk that after a few hours, people just say like, okay, I'm sorry, I don't have any lamella, and then the session gets canceled, and that's a problem that you have much less with single particle.
Yeah, that's why we usually only give 24 hours for these tomography sessions, because in case it's canceled, we don't lose too much time and we don't have to reallocate users for a bit too much time.
And how do you charge the people in case the Cryos screening session was not successful and they cannot collect the data overnight? Do you have a general solution for this?
So since we don't charge users, because we only have internal users. I don't know if you heard Sonja's talk yesterday, but the facility I'm running is basically a twin of what she's running in Frankfurt. I'm running this in Göttingen. So we only have internal users, so we don't charge. But maybe somebody else around here is charging users and can comment on how they handle these unsuccessful sessions.
See, at Oxford, we would charge them actually full. Yeah, but we try to accommodate people. I mean, if they lose a session and next time, if there is a half day available, we try to bring them on quickly on the machine. We keep a track of these things so that they're happy again. Yeah, but you can charge, if you cancel the next days, we don't charge, the first day's charge, similar to a hotel, I would say.
So you only charge the day that they started using it, and then if they cancel and there's like 2-3 days left, then you don't charge them.
Yes, it has happened a few times that some people had booked 3 days and only first day they collected, and then they could cancel the other days. Yeah, wasn't a problem.
Yeah, is it then a problem for you to actually fill the other days on short notice?
For glaciers, no, we have 2 machines. Glaciers for screening, no, not a big deal. Cryos can be, yeah. But again, we have been able to find people, also for cryos that it's then used, it's not completely vested, but glaciers is easy. Now, okay, COVID situation is different, but otherwise it wasn't a problem. Anyone would be happy to jump, and I would know the people who would like to use it actually by the afternoon,
Maybe we have a similar situation. Marcus would know more about how much do we charge, but we have external users, we have internal users, we have more internal users in terms of they have kind of prepaid sessions. But usually actually we also like if the sample is nice, we try to really keep it until the breakout, because it might happen that the 2D classes will be super nice and they will actually want to collect more, or it will be rubbish, right? Then it doesn't make any sense. And actually, since I don't know, for us the Cryospec porter where we save the grids is actually a bit different. So we have almost no contamination while storing the grids, and we do breakout actually every 4 weeks. So we try to keep the storage actually relatively full of grids, which are prospective, and also the group leaders, they already have some B solution. So if all the grids are bad, then they can load directly something else. And I mean it doesn't really happen that we are really idle for a longer period of time.
I see a hands up from Nadav. Do you want us to contribute something?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention we have a diverse set of users on single cryos. So we have also, apart from single particle and tomography, we have people from material science doing soft materials and people doing stem tomography and all kinds of things. So we charge hourly at the end, because not all people want to have a 24-hour session. And that's also a disadvantage, because if some people come on the microscope, see that they have a bad sample, and then are only charged 2 hours, and days is lost.
How do you handle then with the working hours of the staff in the facility? Because if they book the microscopes on an hour basis, I mean, is there users that want to start their slot like at midnight?
There are not many users who want to start at midnight. Occasionally there are users that come at 9. We have a WhatsApp group with that people put, if they announce if they finished early or something like this, and then there is a material scientist that jumps on the microscope. It's basically through a WhatsApp group, everything is managed.
So in terms of screening, so what's the minimum requirement that, especially for the facilities that don't offer screening possibilities? So what's the minimum requirement that you have in order to give a sample access to a high-end data collection machine like Cryos or the Cryo-EM? So would you only request certain biochemistry standards, or nice-looking particles, 2D classes, even 3D reconstructions?
Ours is changing with time, depending on how, as we've been setting up our F2, how much data we can get out of it in a fixed time. Originally, we were really just happy to get some nice looking micrographs out of it. So basically, if that's the eyeball classification. If the micrographs look nice by eye, we'll think about putting it in the Cryo-EM 300. Now, as our users are getting better at preparing better samples, and the microscope is the serial EM setup is working more reliably, now we're beginning to say, okay, we're going to collect you in an afternoon a couple of 100 images, and can we see at least what the initial class averages look like? It's kind of, it's dynamic depending on how much data we can get for each user. I'm trying not to tell people you must have amazing class averages when I know full well my microscope won't deliver them amazing class averages, because that just seems mean. So and also it's keeping one eye on the waiting list, because there's no point having strict criteria and an empty Cryo-EM 300. So if no one wants to use the microscope, I might drop the bar a little and say, you know what, that's borderline, but let's stick it in, because like our investment's just sitting there with a very short waiting list right now. So it's a little bit dynamic. Maybe that's not that transparent, but
I think we see the same here. It depends really on how much pressure there is in what you let through. Normally, we would expect a nice data set from the Arctica. For external people, it's basically the same as with INEXT. You expect some report which is reviewed external anyway, and then you take it from there. But it's what I see getting trickier is that people use fantastic tools like Warp and other fantastic pickers, and nowadays you can have images without particles, but the picker will find something, and they get something out of it. And that's where I kind of sense that I'm becoming an old schooler, where I think like, but I don't see anything, but they get stuff out of it. And that's where I'm always kind of worried how the standards are changing, so to speak, in how to judge what goes in. But I've seen perfect data, I've seen fantastic data coming from data sets where I couldn't see particles. So I guess that's something I just have to get used to.
Anybody requesting negative stain?
When we discussed the enhanced support for INEXT, I was pretty amazed how, with a bunch of leading people in the Cryo-EM field discussing, having a discussion about whether or not negative stain had to be done at all. Where some said, yes, you will always start with that. It's easy, it's fast, just do it. Where other older experienced PIs were like, nah, that's fine. Where I'm like, yeah, but that's probably because you've been working on the same thing for the last 30 years. So you can skip that step. And I was pretty amazed about it. And I think at the time, there were a lot of samples coming in. And I think Carrazzo did all the negative stain in Spain, I think, at the time. And then we kind of picked from there which ones we would try in Cryo. So here we still promote it. Some people do it, some don't. But I was just a bit amazed how a lot of leading people can have a discussion whether or not it should be done at all.
In my experience, well, the negative stain is minimum requirement to get access, let's say, for any high throughput machines, even for screening glaciers or talus. But I also have experience in my life that negative stain may not necessarily work well, especially when people start to look at very small, very tricky things. But normally we ask people to provide preliminary evidence, at least like 2D class averages, if they think that their samples should go to high throughput machine, because otherwise we're just wasting time. And we started with 90% rapid access when the requirements were very strict. People had to provide initial 3D model, and the success rate of our session was people on average would get publication from every 2 or 3 data collections. Myself, I first came to ERIC as user. We spent a year and a half on sample optimization, and we published after the first data collection. So we don't see these rates anymore as we move to bad access. Because yes, people submit some evidence, but then they bring in mutant with sample prep not going well and other things not going well. And then on average, people require 3 to 5 data collections to get things out. So there is price for dropping the bar.
Here at Oxford also, we are doing I'm seeing less and less of negative stain. The reason is probably access to our glaciers, which you book for 24 hours. So if a PI books it for 24 hours, he has some good grids to look at, but also new projects. People with new projects jump on directly with 4 grids of cryo, and they sometimes have success. So I'm seeing people using that backdoor basically to start new projects directly from glaciers, from cryo microscope, and yeah, less and less negative stain, but it's working somehow. So I'm not against it, but not to cryos, to glaciers first. That's the entry.
Joanna?
We are starting to try some negative stain because we're running into some projects now where we can't tell if we've got problems with samples that are coming from the freezing or have occurred somehow in the sample handling. And I'm just wondering, what criteria do other people use negative stain to screen? And as I said in the chat before, we only have a glaciers for screening. So we are trying to find an efficient way to split the time with our glaciers. Do we have to have it at room temperature? I was wondering, is there any way to sort of cool your negative stain grids? You can put them in combination with cryo grids, so you don't have to fill a whole cassette and get a day's negative stain. Just trying to work out the most efficient way to use it, really.
I think if the grids are dried enough, there shouldn't be a problem in cryo. But if they somehow are still a little bit wet, and then you put them in and then they freeze, I can imagine some bubbling or whatever happening. But other than that, I don't see a problem. Other than it's kind of still difficult to accept that you have to use a clip ring and a cartridge for a negative stain.
Well, unfortunately, we have 4 microscope slots, and we didn't want to give one up for a side entry to to dedicate completely to negative stain. So we were like, okay, we're going to go for glaciers. And that's all we've got at the moment. But we're finding that we really need the information for a few projects, and it's just how best to use it. And has anyone got a preferred negative stain? So of course we have to take on all the regulations regarding using radioactive materials as soon as we start using uranocet or uranoformate even more. There's even higher. We have to then assign a radiation supervisor and things like that. As soon as you go to uranoformate, you have to make up solutions in the lab. So we're just trying to work out the best stain as well. We've had a little bit of success with nano W, but we can't, if we need to go to then some sort of a low res reconstruction, doesn't seem to work as well, and you can't get the contrast. Any other stains anyone would suggest?
So the bad news is that nothing works as good as uranyl acetate. And I've tried them all. And actually, I was just replying to a new email from a new lab in Italy that just came up with a new solution called Solution X. And it's a different thing. And I'm going to give it a try. They have very good data on sections. They have a Nature Communication, I think, or a science report paper about that. It's called Solution X. It's the lab of Mauro Gemmi in Pisa. He's an expert of electron diffraction. and gonna give it a try in a single particle. But honestly, and I do feel, because, you know, especially in Italy, working with uranil powder is a nightmare. And setting up the facility right now, I started in July to get the powder in April, and had a special contract with TAB, which basically is the only dealer who agreed to. It's a nightmare. So, I mean, I'll let you know, but you have really no way to cut corners. And the other thing I want to say, I want to fully second Wim on the fact that we had many long expertise PI working on Cryo-EM or the 20S, and they basically, they don't need negative stain. They just want to go to cryo and see, and maybe they have a ligand. So, and commenting on Yuri, yeah, I agree that for smaller particles, negative staining is not the best way to go. But the way we use it, and I used it also for the Cas9, which is 170 kilodalton, is just 10 minutes experiment. So I make these very small molecules on the grid, and I have a look. Again, I see basically dots on a CETA camera, but you know, it's fine enough. I want to see if it's aggregating, if you do have clustering, if you have any mess going on. And then, you know, it's 15 minutes. Price wise, it's what, 10 euros. And then I go to the Arctica with like better expectations. And what else I want to say? I want to say three things. Okay, we used negative stain grids in the Arctica, but they came from a really short cycle in a 120 TEM. So they were like pretty dried. So we just had a look. Was an experiment that we didn't really need high resolution. So I made a couple of negative stain grids. I went to the microscope, the DL100C. I had a look at the staining, was fine. Took it out, put in the Talos Arctica screening, few data collection hours on the CETA, and we got to the classes. So yes, it's possible. As Wim said, make sure it's basically dry enough. And I don't want to deviate the conversation, but I was very curious. Maybe we can still talk about this, but I was very curious to know about the facilities that implemented warp, focus, any other on the fly processing pipeline. Do you offer these to only internal, external, only to people who ask? Like, let's take, for example, if any of you is using warp, are you warping your data set to anyone or just on request? But that's something we can talk about later if you want to discuss.
It's actually a good point, because this would be the point after the next point. So maybe we can briefly also sum up. I mean, we have heard already different models, like how they run it in the facilities, like who is using the microscope and how. If I understand correctly from Wim, basically they're just sitting there and telling you guys what squares you want to collect. And but maybe there's also facilities that actually do a more thorough training and actually let users use the microscopes themselves. So
I think I have to make a small comment. So external people, we run the microscope. All internal users are, in principle, we get them to be fully independent.
Okay, cool. Then I didn't get this.
We have two levels of access. One is super user. We probably need to redefine it, because during COVID-19 we actually went forward too much, because in the past super users were people who can run microscope independently. They normally go through, they were pre-selected to be on the level of facility manager or slightly below, and we just let them to run instrument as we are after some training, and they also need to accept certain way we would like to operate, because as people pointed out yesterday, you don't want instrument to be realigned or settings changed in such way that it jeopardize next session. So this is why we go through this vetting process, that they know how we would like instrument to be set and how we would like it to get after the session. And then we started this EPU users now. So EPU users, we do not expect them to be very much knowledgeable about EM. We prepare instruments for them, but they have to be knowledgeable of EPU or other software they're going to use for setup of their session. So we pre-align the microscope, we do gain referencing, GIF tuning, and say, okay, so now it's yours. You can pre-screen your grid, you select your grid, and you set up EPU session. We also let this to do for serial EM, but maybe it's coincidence. Normally, people who use serial EM, they're pretty much super user level, so they know how to do both. Yeah, that's our experience. It worked reasonably well. Some people have difficulties, but in general, I think it works much better than we anticipated.
So we have a similar situation here. So we start training users on, as you call them, your EPU users on our glaciers for screening and collecting initial data sets. And as soon as we move on to the cryos, they actually get a full serial EM training, which means they have to become you know, more in like microscopists and not just people that can click buttons to get images. I don't know. I have the feeling that there's always a mixture of user groups at all facilities. There is like a group of super users, and there's also some people, you call them EPU users, that just come and press buttons. Is there any facility that only does one or the other way, like to one of the extremes?
Yeah, I guess we would be one of the extremes. I mean, I have to make clear, so we have independent users, but they are independent in collecting data. So they just follow the manual, click the buttons, and do that. And you know, when you say facility, I think external people that we can't, you know, you can't let them do that. Although sometimes you get experienced external people that you can let them set up tomography positions or something like that because they have done something already. But in principle, so like for instance, nobody here, but absolutely nobody but me touches direct alignments or apertures. So, well, the users will center an objective aperture. That's pretty much it. Condenser apertures on the Cryos, you don't change them. So nobody does it. Nobody even knows how to center it. So that's quite extreme, but we kind of locked it down that way so that everybody gets nice data in the same way. And everybody just goes through the standard recipe. There's one for single particle, one for tomography. Half of it, the mapping and everything, is the same anyway. So yeah, it's you know, I wouldn't say serial EM monkeys, but it's very close.
Well, just a quick question. To stop people doing alignments, do you just use the power of your personality, or do you actually just remove?
No, it's
all the options.
It's a mix. I mean, I just started doing it, telling people, and it's something that was brought up yesterday already, that you know, education is easy, re-education is difficult. So we only have this problem with new people that come in from other labs that have been taught to do this all the time, and then some of them keep doing it. We also had the problem with people from outstations who are also, so ML outstations that are in principle trained to collect here themselves. Same thing. And then, yeah, I mean, I have to use some force indeed. Often they send emails to the boss saying, because they don't do this, all their microscopes must be bad, but our results you know, say a different story. So most of the time I just sit down with them, and you know, it's very simple. Just ask anybody, why do you align the beam tilt pivot points? Yeah, and I've never ever gotten a decent answer. How not aligning your beam tilt pivot point is going to ruin the quality of your data. Nobody knows. Everybody's just been told to do it. I've done the same thing 20 years ago. Huh? I've done the same thing. I always went through these things. But no, you just explain it to them, and you ask them, why are you doing this? Do you really understand why? And then I can explain why there's no need to do it. But it's very important that nobody does it, because if somebody starts to do it, you have to train all the others to check if that one person has messed it up in the previous session. Because that's what aligning is. Aligning is only checking if the previous user messed it up. But it's difficult, and it took some time.
Okay. Because our users are used to having to align a little bit on the glaciers, and now I've got the Cryos, I prefer they didn't do it. So it's going to be, I'm wondering if I just need to remove all the options from the work set and set up a user account, because that's easier, or
yeah, you could
try to train them.
No, user account. Just use the user account. That's what they're for.
Okay.
I just renamed some of the tabs in the user interface. They're now called forbidden 1, forbidden 2, forbidden 3. And you can even change the background color to a bright red. So it's like when they have the, when they open the tab, they're like, whoa, I went somewhere where I shouldn't be. So I train all my users when they see a tab that's called forbidden and is red in background, they should try to leave this tab as soon as possible. And so far I didn't have any problems with people like messing with any alignments. They also don't do alignments, so we check them like once a week with the facility staff and fix them. And luckily, the thermo machines, they're actually quite stable over a week. So there's no need to realign much very frequently.
I really like using Serial-EM, but I find it very difficult to convince people to do it because they all on EPU at the end. Even though Serial-EM is more efficient and you can collect twice as much data with Serial-EM and so on. So you have some tips for training people in Serial-EM. I mean, they see all the menus there and there is this, set this, set that, and they are really confused usually by this and have a hard time with software.
I think what would be very beneficial is if, I think this is topic of the other breakout session, but what I think would be very beneficial is what Becky started yesterday as a short discussion, whether the facilities that actually use Serial-EM a lot could make their manuals available. And I have to say that all our Serial-EM manuals are basically continuations and extensions from what Wim created at the EMBL. So there was a postdoc coming to our lab from the EMBL and she brought the manuals and I used it as a very good basis to start manuals here and extended them. And I think there's many facilities that have very, very nice written procedures, which button to click where and why and how and good tips and whatever. And I think if we would actually just upload them somewhere, then, it would already be easier for the facilities to make very good and accessible manuals for the users. And then, this is my experience, in the beginning, everybody who's using Serial-EM the first time has like, well, there are so many buttons, but as soon as they have a protocol which tells them step by step, you press this button and then you press this button and you do this and you check this and so on, then in the beginning, they actually get much less intimidated by all the buttons, because at some point they actually know which are the buttons that you have to press more often. So they feel more secure and at some point also get the concept of Serial-EM, which is, I have to admit, sometimes not the most straightforward. I think we actually covered quite a lot of points. Thanks for everyone who contributed, especially for the panelists, because I think it was interesting to hear how they run the facilities, because they're quite different. Let's hope we all at least took something useful from this discussion for how we run our own facilities in the future.